So a lot of the time that you're playing the game, most of it is spent either just clicking on random things or just staring at a screen for a long time until you see something shake. And the reason why that is, I think, is because there's no real problem for the player to solve. This is good. Hi there, welcome to Games Over Coffee Consulting. This is where indie developers will submit their games, and I do my best to give feedback on their game design. Today we're looking at a game called Find the Gnome 2. I have not played Find the Gnome 1. This is by Game Feelings. What we typically do on this show is try to figure out how this person's game is or is not getting the experience that they want. Now, what's funny about this specific entry is that this person kind of already figured it out. They kind of already did my work for me. While I was playing this game, I found that the person's analysis of their own game was pretty apt. Hopefully, my take on this will be helpful in some way. This person said they want a low barrier of entry puzzle game with a bit of an action difficulty, if you want that, or just some relaxing vibe, and the whole feeling that you actually did something when you helped these gnomes. Time on the game well spent. And then he goes on to say, I really tried my best to make the game easy to get into, but at the same time wanted to utilize PC-like depth because I'm on Steam. While tuning the gameplay, I had a really hard time trying to be simple and complex at the same time, and I think by not choosing, I achieved neither one. For example, I wanted a minimalist and self-explaining gameplay and UI, but that also made it really difficult to add a choose-your-own difficulty, so I ended up with achievements for those things. The strange thing here about this game, so first off, let me just say I really had fun with this game. I think this game is great. I think there's some really good design in here. The game has a pretty self-explanatory vibe about it. The mechanics are pretty simple to learn. The game overall is very simple, very easy to understand, so that's good. What I want to talk about specifically right now is puzzles and hidden object games. This game is not really a puzzle game. It's a hidden object game. It's like half relaxing, half tiny bit action, like relaxing action almost. So if you're not familiar with this game, how the game works is that you look for gnomes throughout this diorama. The gnomes are hiding in like different objects and stuff. You click on an object, the gnomes will run out, and then you click on the gnome in order to collect it with your bird. So the game doesn't have much of a puzzle vibe. But this is the weird thing about it, is that I've tried to look for these 3D diorama hidden object games, but not many of them are 3D. Not many of them are this diorama kind of feel. And I thought that was strange because it seems like that kind of game should be here. There's tons of hidden object games, but they all utilize just like a two-dimensional space, kind of like a Where's Waldo or I Spy. Some of those include Hidden Folks, 24 Solar Terms, and then there's a bunch of others that I haven't played. The only other 3D hidden object game that came to mind that was similar in some regard was Elebits for the Wii, which I did play a lot actually when I first had a Wii. Mechanically, that game is probably the closest to this one. What you were talking about with your game design, you were trying to figure out how to make this game simple and complex at the same time, although I think you meant depth. You were trying to think of, you said PC-like depth, so you wanted this to have a deep puzzle game, but also simple at the same time, which you can have, right? The Witness is a testament to that. And of course, deep, if you're unaware, is just experientially different types of interactions with your game. There's a ton of different puzzles in The Witness that all utilize the same mechanic, but they're experientially different. When I was playing this game, it was fun, but something that bothered me about it was trying to figure out why it felt kind of bland when I was playing it. The main purpose of the game is to find gnomes, obviously. But how are you supposed to find them? You just look for them, right? You just have the screen in front of you and you rotate the camera until you find a gnome and you click on it. And if you can't find a gnome, then what you have to do is wait until you see something shake and then click on that. So a lot of the time that you're playing the game, most of it is spent either just clicking on random things or just staring at a screen for a long time until you see something shake. And the reason why that is, I think, is because there's no real problem for the player to solve. There's no real challenge for the player to begin their game loop. If you think about regular hidden object games like Where's Waldo or I Spy, the idea is to try to look at the object that you're looking for and try to find it amongst all this other stuff. There's so many things that are fighting for your attention that it's kind of a brain teaser. It makes you go, okay, well, there's other things going on here. How can I find this object within this myriad of things? And when you look at Find the Gnome 2, that's not really what's going on, right? It's just kind of a nice looking structure, or a nice looking building, or something that's just, it's very simple. It's very easy to understand at a glance. So that makes it, not overstimulating. So you don't really need to hunt for anything. Or if you look at a game like Hidden Folks, you're given kind of a riddle underneath the little object that you're looking for. When you look for that object, you kind of use the context of the area. So if you're looking for a monkey who's, say, like resting, for example, you want to look in areas that monkeys would be. So like in trees or something like that, right? You're somehow taking a problem and you're beginning to solve it by looking out into things. And that's the challenge that's involved there. And in Find the Gnome 2, I don't really see much of a challenge. If, however, this game was presented like those other hidden object games where I was either given a riddle or I was overstimulated, or both, I could somehow begin to start solving a problem. And instead of just looking at a screen, waiting to see something shake, and then clicking on it and then chasing the gnome down, instead, I could try to use context to try to figure out where that gnome would be. And if you wanted to keep that whole simple UI kind of thing, you wouldn't even need to use words. You could use like symbols or something, like this one's in a plant, or this one likes electronics, something like that. I noticed you said that you wanted the gamer to feel as if they had the time well spent in the game, that they were helping the gnomes out. I think a lot of that has to do with the reading of the story of the narrative, because I didn't pay attention at all to the narrative and I just went straight to the game. And as I'm playing with the game, I like how you have the interactions with the actual characters, like clicking on a gnome sends your bird down to collect it. I like that. But I was totally disconnected from the story. I like that you said that you put everything very specifically. So like the gnomes have a specific reason why they're all hiding in areas. There's a specific reason why you're floating above the city as opposed to like first person mode or something like that. And I like that you have all the lore reasons for all of this. But as far as the gameplay is concerned, I don't really feel any of that in there. The only time that I do feel it is with the bird, when you send down the bird to collect it, which, by the way, I do want to talk about really quickly. This might be a bit of a tangent, but some of the mechanic issues that I had, one of them was sending the bird down to collect the gnome. He has like this kind of cooldown period. So you click on a gnome and you don't collect him instantly. Your bird has to come down and find it. So it's kind of this timing kind of thing. You have to click on the gnome before he hides again in order for your bird to collect him. If the gnome hides before your bird gets to him, then the bird has to go back up to the airship. But when the bird is going back up to the airship, you can't click the gnome again. You have to wait till the bird resets and then you can click on them. You don't really know how long that cooldown will take because there's no meter or anything to show you. It's like I found myself focusing on the bird's shadow to see when the shadow would disappear in order for me to go, oh, okay, now he's ready again, and I can click again. But there is a way to avoid that whole cooldown period, and that's by making sure that the gnome doesn't hide again. And the way you do that is by clicking on an object that he's running toward. So say he comes out of a pot and he's running toward a bush. If you click on the bush before he gets there, then he'll go to a different area. You explained this mechanic in the game, I think in text form, but I didn't really feel like I got any practice out of it. I feel like that should probably be in the tutorial because I use it a lot in the game. As for your game achieving relaxation, I want to say that a relaxing game has to do with there's a challenge in front of you, but you can do that challenge at your own pace. Sizable is a really good example of this in the diorama kind of sense, because you can take the whole puzzle at your own pace. There's no timer. As for if this game was relaxing, it did have kind of a relaxing vibe, but at the same time, hidden object games, I feel like probably shouldn't be too relaxing. 24 Solar Terms, that game was a little too relaxing. Like it made me want to fall asleep when I played that game. There's objects that you have to find, but there's not really any brain power involved in finding those objects. I found that kind of state in your game when I was playing it. However, in Find the Gnome 2, it's a lot more interesting because there's little action parts in there. Sometimes gnomes will just start running, out of a hiding place and you have to catch them. So that kept me engaged. It didn't have the same effect as that 24 Solar Term game did. I think if you want to have a more engaging time in your game, you probably want to increase the mental load on the player. In a game that doesn't really have a whole lot to focus on, increasing the complexity could be a good thing. For example, in a game like I Spy, which is not a very complex game, the act of finding this one object in a myriad of other objects is the complex part. There's a lot of complexity with trying to figure out where this one thing is when there's so many things. Same with Where's Waldo. So the complexity doesn't always have to be a bunch of different steps. On the other side, there's the idea of very simple puzzles like sizable, or like Nog, where you have very easy to figure out puzzles, but there's a lot of steps to them. And to me, I don't really like these types of puzzles, but they are very popular, I think. Monument Valley is another one. You don't really have to think too hard, you just have to follow the steps. If I were to give advice on how to increase the engagement in your game, I would think about what makes this game interesting. Why is it fun to begin with? What is it that you personally connect with in the game? Or when you give this game to other people, what is it that they find themselves doing most of the time? And then focus all of your effort on that. When I play the game, I get a sense of this kind of exploratory nature, this kind of discovery kind of stuff. I loved clicking on just a whole bunch of objects just to see what they would do, you know, if they would do anything. And to be honest, it felt kind of like Elebits in that kind of way. In Elebits, there's not a whole lot to do, but the fun of Elebits comes from playing with the physics engine, which at the time in, I think, 2006 or so, the physics engine was something kind of new, especially with a Wiimote. So flinging stuff around in the room is always a lot of fun, or at least it was in that game. So they focused basically their whole gameplay on that element of discovering things by, you know, shaking them or throwing them down the stairs or stuff. If you decide to make a Find the Gnome 3 or somehow try to modify this game, I would say try to figure out the one thing that is really interesting about the game and then just focus a lot more on that part. Yeah, that's pretty much it. As far as the aesthetic goes of this game, I really like the art style. I'm a sucker. I'm a huge sucker for low poly kind of stuff. You did a lot of your analysis by yourself, and so I don't feel like I have a whole lot to say here. I think what you said was pretty apt. I think, like you said, you didn't really decide on one specific type of gameplay to go towards, so you ended up with a kind of mismatch or an unfocused kind of game. I definitely think it could use more focus, but I think the focus really relies on what you find specifically interesting about the game. And I feel like you might be focusing a little too much on the systems part of it as opposed to the just the mechanical nature of what is interesting about it. If you're not this developer and you have a game and you want me to cover it like this, submit it at gamesover.coffee or follow the link in the description. This is my second channel. I have a first channel called Games Over Coffee where I talk about AAA games. All right, that's it. Bye.